Okay. Okay. But yeah, those that will help. And then ask your farrier too about the soles and the bars and what he wants done with
Yes.
them going forward.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Shall do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at Mr. Pablo. Oops. There we go. Oh, oh, it's off to the side. Can you see it?
Yep. Yep.
There we
Yep.
go. So, other than Stitch being out of commission, when I was in England, they called laminitis a little touch of the lammy.
Sorry, I'm just going to put my dog out of my room for 2 seconds.
Okay,
Rosie. Sorry about that.
that's okay.
Like toddlers.
I know. Well, and somebody is like not leaving me alone.
Yeah, no. It's her time, obviously.
It's her time. I was trying to do a
Yeah.
podcast the other day and she was trying to make herself into a hairpiece, like she was just almost crawling on my head.
Oh, it's cute.
So Pablo's looking pretty steady these days.
Yeah,
Slow, but
his body seems to have changed shape a little bit, I think.
hmm.
Um, well, I don't know. He looks
So where do you feel he's made some improvements and where do you feel he's struggling or hasn't changed or
so
uh
I think he's made some improvements how he holds his neck. Um, I don't know, well, you can't really see it yet, but I don't know, he seems to hold his neck a little bit better.
hmm.
We're still struggling with going forward quite a bit. I don't know whether he's a little bit tender on his front feet as well, though he might have lots of issues going on. I'm not sure. Who knows with Pablo? Um, I mean, but if I look back, I suppose at where we started, he is progressing a lot, isn't he?
He looks
Um,
really like this is the most stable I've ever seen him. He doesn't yet look sort of smooth, like he looks hitchy in the back legs, like they're a little stiff. Um,
mhm.
but I go, this is like double the speed he used to go. And
Yeah.
and
Yes.
he just motored around his first lap without a single stop or sniff or distraction or biting his legs or whatever. It's like that's the
Yeah.
first time I've seen this horse make one full lap without a pause.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been trying to do maybe not circles, but kind of rectangles down that end of the arena just to hopefully work our way up to circles.
hmm.
I mean, we're starting on a bit of a circle here, but I think I'll just do one and then kind of go into a rectangle shape. Um, but sometimes it's a bit hard for him and he stops often.
Yeah. And so, like, even that, he's very clear, isn't he? When it starts to feel a little bit like in the too hard category, he lets you know by stopping. And at least
Yeah.
he's advanced enough, feeling comfortable and more proficient in his balance that on the long straight lines now, it's more like a normal horse. It's just not the
Yes.
same level of difficulty when we started. And
Yep.
and now
Yep.
when you put him on a circle, he starts to stop a lot. So I think you're right to kind of cut the arena in half and start with big rectangles or squares. And then as you go through your corners, you can think of those like a quarter of a circle. You can kind of either walk behind him
Yep.
through the corners, or you can be a little to the inside like you are. And then this is
Yep.
good. Do you walk with him on a straight line while you're on the inside instead of behind him?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I kind of mix it up a bit. Sometimes I walk on
Hmm.
the inside and yeah, then go behind depending.
So you can really see the difference in the support when you started off and you're directly behind him. What you're doing is you're sort of reducing any side to side lateral bending of the spine. And that usually gives them
Mm-hmm.
enough stability that they get comfortable pretty quick and they start to choose forward. They feel they're like self-propelled instead of always wanting to stop. They just sort of choose not
Yep.
to stop. And so when you work behind him,
Mm.
I think that is now home base, where that would be his warm up, or if he gets too challenged, go back to that because that could, you can still work
Yes.
that way and
Yep.
reinforce what he's achieved. And then I
Mm-hmm.
think instead of even doing rectangles or circles, another option would be because it was sort of interesting as you're doing the rectangles from the inside. He's mostly on a straight line, but he has to turn sooner than when you're on the rail all the way around. And
Yes. Yeah.
what
Yep.
I'm seeing is when you change your position from ground driving behind him, where you're working on
Mm-hmm.
less lateral bending, and you shift to the inside, as soon as you're on the inside, regardless of the path of travel, you're addressing the twisting of the spine versus the bending of the spine. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Yep.
so the twisting, which in us is this twisting versus
Mm-hmm.
bending sideways. Those are two
Yes.
different movements in the spine, right?
Yep.
So on the long rein work, when we're directly behind the horse, we're taking away the bending and trying to stabilize the body that way. But
Yep.
the second you go to the one inside rein and only adjust the outside rein and you're facing him rather than behind him,
Mhm.
just that change of use in the long reins starts to affect the twisting of the spine more than the bending.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So that might be enough for him is to keep him on the rail the whole time,
Okay.
but work between start behind him and then try to
Yep.
shift to the inside, but don't change his path of travel. Just
Yes.
change,
Okay.
just change your
Where I'm
position.
standing.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I do go out large in a minute and do I don't know how many laps I do, but doing that like standing on the inside
Oh, good, because
of him.
that's what I would hope to
Yeah.
see. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And
yeah.
it depends. I mean, he's pretty good. He's not as spooky as Stitch. Not that he looks spooky at the moment, but going up to the scary end of the arena, if I feel like he's gawking at something, I'll go behind him so that he doesn't kind of come sideways and land on me.
There you go.
Not that he's ever even done that, but yeah, that's in my head.
Yeah. Like it's not, I kind of like what you're doing. So part of me is thinking, even though he's slower, he stops a lot, he's struggling when you're on this square or circle working from the inside. He's also kind of working through it and working it out. So
Mm.
I would leave it sort of on the menu, but
Mm-hmm.
if he's stopping more and more frequently rather than just going behind him again around the arena, you could say, let's go off of the turn and just track along the fence line.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because he's getting a little stuck, even though you were very generous on the sort of circle, square shape, whatever.
yeah.
It's like
He's stopping a lot.
he's stopping a lot more, but then all of a sudden he kind of has a breakthrough and then he stops again.
Mm,
And then he has another
mm.
little breakthrough. So I
Yeah.
don't want to say don't do it because it is working. It is
Hmm.
working. And what I'm kind of looking for is the way he started on that first lap. I would say that's exactly what we're looking for. And then on the circle, it goes back to feeling a little bit more where you had to start with him.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
wondering, I would look to experiment. Is there an in-between step that I'm missing? Like, is there
Mm.
another little gradual transitional step? Like, this is excellent. So once you start walking with him from the inside, he's not as good as he was the first lap with you behind him, but this looks a
Mm.
little more manageable for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Better than on the rectangle.
Yeah. And if he stays on the straight line, is he stopping just as much as if he's on the circle or less?
No, I think he was just looking. Oh, he stops less when we're going on the straight line when I'm behind. Sorry, when I'm at the side of him.
Mhm.
He was just looking at the ponies, I think.
Oh,
Any kind of have a bit of a distraction.
yeah,
He wasn't very. It was not too bad, but he wasn't as with me as sometimes he has been. I think
yeah.
in this session, he was just a bit. I don't know, looking external everywhere.
So this is really good because as soon as he got a little stuck, you went behind him again, and the two of you are now sort of looking more like where you started, and which
Hmm.
is good. Which what that means is at least the exercise done this way on the long reins is kind of working for him. Oops, sorry. Um,
Yep.
that this is, and that's what I would kind of call home base when I'm developing a horse, is
Yep.
that the forward comes back, the calmness comes back, the attention comes back, whatever exercise where he goes, yeah, I could go forward. That's home base. And then wherever he
Hmm.
gets stuck is a little bit the challenge territory. And so you
Yep.
may have to, and that's what I love without the surcingle. You can go from the inside to behind to the inside from
Yeah.
behind
Yeah.
without really changing the straight path of travel that seems to be easier for him than any degree of turning yet.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because he still looks a little stiff back there. The way you know
Yeah.
he's more comfortable before we can see a little more ease of motion is the fact that he's not stopping tells you he's more comfortable,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And that's still kind of easily lost as you give him new challenges. So,
Hmm.
what you want to keep reinforcing is where he most willingly goes forward. And I would think in your session with him, I would still make that the bulk of the time.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Not
And
make it too hard.
right. So spend most of your session doing what is easiest for him, where he voluntarily stays the most forward, which is going to
Hmm.
be from behind him going around the rail, more than likely. And then
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
in this particular video, where you tried the circle or the square early on, I would
Hmm.
maybe try that midway of your session, like give him a little more time with the easy part, maybe throw in.
Yeah.
I would say it's almost enough of a challenge for him to stay on the rail the entire time, but move from behind him to the inside.
Okay. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Because the more he moves, the sooner he changes.
Yeah. We're not going to get far if he stops all the time, are we?
it just takes longer. It's part of the
Yeah.
process, but it slows down the rate of change. And so,
Yeah.
especially with a horse like him, you've slogged through for quite a while to just get the forward you have.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I would try to encourage that still for the bulk of the session with him because
Yeah.
it's like for him going around the way he is when you're behind him on the rail, that is now he started there great. You challenged him with the turns and then he came back to it pretty well. So that tells you it's kind
Yes.
of solid for him. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like sometimes when we focus on the easiest path for the horse, what ends up happening with a horse like him is even if you don't practice circles, you try one in the middle of your session, he still stops a lot. So you go, okay, next session, I'll just try one in the middle of our session, see how he does. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like the more comfortable the horses get, they get better at the challenging parts, even if we don't work on them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a little
Rather
bit
than
of a
challenging him too much.
right. And it's
Mm.
a little
Yep.
bit of a different way of thinking because we think the circles ultimately would help him the most. But if we're
Hmm.
kind of having a setback on the forwardness that you've just increased, then it
Hmm.
might be the challenge might outweigh the benefit right now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Makes sense.
and we don't have to work on circles for him to get good at circles.
Yeah.
In order for him to get good at circles, which is where we'll get more engagement of the hindquarter, he has to be more comfortable in motion in general before he can take on that particular challenge. So that's
Yeah.
why I'm sort of thinking if you play with moving from behind him to the inside,
Yeah.
that that would be a
Yeah.
little less of a challenge to start with.
Yeah.
And maybe even leave the circles for a couple of weeks. Don't even try them for a week or two and then
Yeah.
come back and try one once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think his body does look different. Like I just think he looks like he's a little bit more filled out in the right places. And if
Yeah.
I think back to our earliest conversations when he really didn't want to move, I remember the first thing that caught my eye about his movement was how much wiggle it had.
Yes.
All the way
Yeah.
through his back and hindquarter and neck. It was like with
Yeah.
every step, there was a little bit of a sideways wiggle.
Yeah.
And now, throughout this entire video, what I'm seeing is like more self-control over his movement. Instead of looking like he's kind of falling forward, he looks stable
Mm.
enough that he's got some control over his forward motion. And
Mhm.
his willingness, well, as we're talking about it, I would say not right there in that moment, but in general,
Generally. Yeah.
um, in general, especially when you first started off with him, that was like the most stable I've seen him and the most in control and comfortable in his movement. And now it's starting to come back. But that may be where, even though in theory the circle should help more, sometimes if we do it a bit early or a bit too much for where he's at, it kind
Mhm.
of it doesn't help as much as it should because he's not quite fully physically ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's more ready than he's ever been, but depending on
Hmm.
how he responds to doing the circles versus how he responds to the straight lines, he's still fragile enough in his development that I would keep going the easiest way first.
Okay. Yeah.
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 So I don't
I'm
want to
just getting
take,
a bit too ambitious, aren't I?
well,
Trying
and
to
I think
push the process a bit quick.
it's had its benefits. Like I can definitely see the benefit of
Yeah.
working with it, and you're working with it perfectly and beautifully. And I'm just thinking more movement is what's going to help him
Mm.
develop
Release.
overall a little bit faster than if we challenge the movement too much.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
a little bit of challenge and what you've slogged through on your circles is like, you guys have done a great job. The fact that he can even do them is amazing. And he's
Yeah.
made progress because you can see little moments where he gets the coordination and sort of motors forward for about 3 or 4 strides. But then
Yeah.
but when he's getting stuck, he's kind of getting pretty stuck. Like he's not
Yes. Yeah.
moving off as easily as I would like to see.
Yeah.
So
It's
I'm
like we can't
thinking,
go around one corner without stopping pretty well.
right, which is fine. You're still getting the benefit. You're giving him the right support. He's getting the benefit of the exercise. So none of that is a problem. None of this is a
Hmm.
problem. I'm just thinking he's going to fall in love with feeling comfortable because he's been uncomfortable for so long. And I think
Yeah.
you'll sort of see things change in a little bit more obvious way if we don't challenge him too much too
Mm.
soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, because he's just
Yeah.
getting pretty positive about moving again. Like,
Mm.
let me just bounce
Yeah.
it with, let me just bounce it right back to, whoops, the beginning. Because I loved that first lap while you were putting your dogs out. I had sort of started the um,
Oh, yeah.
video,
Yeah.
and I was like, wow, like it was a huge change.
Yeah.
So, like, this is, you've come around maybe half of the long side, and he's just,
Hmm.
it's still a little stiff back there in the hind legs, but it's like he's got a nice, steady, slow rhythm. And like you said, he doesn't have
Hmm.
his nose in the dirt, but he also doesn't have his neck short. And
Yeah.
he just looks kind of content on this first lap.
Yeah. Yeah. He
And
does quite like it when I'm behind him. I can feel that he's just, it's like he goes into a bit of a zone. He likes it.
yeah. And so
Mm.
if you spend, I would say at least half to 3/4 of the session still there.
Hmm.
And then
Okay.
the 1/4, maybe to 1/2 of the session, moving to the inside position, but not asking for a
Yep.
circle, for maybe experiment with that idea for like 3 sessions in a week and see.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then the next week, one of those sessions, try a circle and sort of see how he does.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he's kind of,
Second lap, every second lap I could go on the inside and then as we get to the corners, go behind him so they're not too challenging.
yeah,
I'll do that perhaps.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And you can kind of play with mixing it up. I would say, like in this particular video, which you might only be doing because it's the video, um, you do one lap around and then you move to the inside and sort of start your rectangle or square.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I would say that's just a little too soon for him in the session. So
Okay.
normally would you go to the circle that soon, or would you do a few more laps before you tried the circle?
Uh, no, recently I've been doing one lap around and then starting on circles or rectangles.
Okay. So
So
that's the
yeah,
other thing you could experiment with is, how long do you work him in a session?
half hour.
Okay. So out of that
Yeah.
30 minutes, I would give him at least a good solid 5 minutes of what is the easiest for him that he likes the most before I would do
Okay.
anything different.
Okay. Yep.
So if you
Yep.
give him, like, he started off really nice, And I think if you had given him 5 minutes of that instead of just the one lap, you might
Yeah.
have had better luck with the circles. And
Okay. Yeah.
I I'm trying to remember back because I know we had talked about he wasn't really forward on the straight line or the circle, and I'm pretty sure we had talked about experimenting with both to see what was
Yeah.
easier for him.
Yeah. Yeah. That I hang on, or was that Stitch? I was definitely doing attempting to do more circles with Stitch.
Definitely with Stitch, but
Yeah.
if I recall correctly, and I could be wrong, I think he was sort of the last time we looked at Pablo, he stopped equally as much whether he was on a straight line or a circle. And I think that's why we introduced circles to him. I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look back,
Yeah.
but I'm pretty sure the last time we even experiment, because I remember thinking that with the long reins, he was either going to be less forward or more forward, and he was suddenly more forward. That's why we switched
Yeah.
from hand walking to the long reins. And then
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I remember because he was still struggling to stay forward with you behind him, and you had tried some circles, and we looked at it on the video, and he looked about the same at the time, whether you were doing a circle or a straight line. And I think that's why
Yeah.
you were doing
Yeah.
one
There was.
lap.
Yeah. There was a few times where he amazingly just did really well on the circle. Um. Yeah. Didn't stop much, and he was. Yeah. He was going around quite well, but then that's gone away
Yeah.
now.
So
I don't
I
know what
think,
happened to that.
well, I think because at the time it might have helped him figure something out. So he stayed forward because it was giving him relief in some way. And
Yeah.
as he's developing in this video now, he's showing us something different, which just means
Yeah.
he's changed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is the hardest part of rehab is when you're effective and they change, we don't always think we need to change our strategy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would say kind of a rule of thumb with Pablo is when he offers forward, that's what you want to repeat. And
Yeah. Take it.
when
Yeah.
he starts stopping a lot, you just take that off the menu for the day. You don't take it
Yeah.
off completely, but you're like,
Yep.
okay, that's not working for him today.
Hmm.
But I think you're right. Like I was thinking, why were we doing one lap and instantly into a circle? And I think that's why, is because he wasn't that different, and sometimes he was better on the
No, I know
circle.
why. I know why, because I've got it in my head that I've gone, right, let's progress. Let's go on to the next
Oh,
thing. So that's me trying to push the process along too quick.
well, and you've pushed it successfully. I'm just thinking this might be the fastest way to rebuild his hindquarter stability. You're not wrong to push it. And what I've seen from experience is the way horses react to change is
Hmm.
the easier it gets, the easier it gets.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So
Yeah.
with a horse like Pablo that's still teetering in, I want to go forward, I don't want to go forward,
Hmm.
sometimes the fastest path of
Make it a bit
progress
easier.
is just make it easy enough that he wants to go forward. And
Yes, yeah.
there will come a point where he will stay forward on the circle, um, either because it's what he needs at the time, which is what's already happened, or
Yeah.
because he's ready to work on that more.
Yeah, yeah. And funny enough, I've noticed because I've been doing this kind of pattern for quite a few weeks, I suppose. And he's becoming a lot, he seems a bit stressed when we first get in the arena, just slightly,
Hmm.
like he's nipping at the long lines when I'm trying to attach it to his halter. Just little things like that.
Yep.
Whereas previously, before I pushed him a bit harder, he was quite chilled.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah, so he's
just
like, I don't really want to do this work. It's a bit hard.
think of it this way, because the pattern you're on in this video, I would call sort of a 50-50 pattern, where you're giving 50% easy, 50% challenge. And
Mm-hmm.
I check it out because I could be wrong. Horses make a liar out of me all the time. But it's like if you change that ratio, and out of 30 minutes, you spend 20 minutes on what feels easy to him and 10 minutes on the challenge,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
adjusting that ratio might help him, like you'll either notice it in his behavior or his forward energy. One of the two will
yes, yeah,
change, right?
yeah,
And because if we make it too easy, we quit making progress. And he's a horse that you kind of have to always keep pushing a little bit, because
yeah. Which,
he's got a ways to go.
yeah, exactly. Which I felt I was doing a little bit of that by staying behind him all the time. I
Mhm.
thought mix it up a little bit kind of thing.
Yes.
But
And
yeah, not perhaps as much as I'm attempting to do.
well, I agree with you 100%. And you're getting the result you've been looking for. And
Yeah,
my only thought is either take the circles out for a week or two and play with working from the inside, and
yeah,
see if he doesn't get more consistent in the not stopping, right?
yeah,
And if
yeah.
he gets more consistent and stops way less frequently, that's what's going to give you the forward you need for the circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah, yeah, it does. Yeah,
And I go, when they're stopping everywhere, I just keep trying different things until they start moving.
yeah, yeah.
And what I saw the first lap in this particular video is like, that's it. Nailed it. That's what we were looking for. We were looking
Yeah,
for that. And
yeah.
so,
He feels like a fairly balanced horse when I'm behind him now. He
yeah.
seems to, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So make that slightly more than 50% of his session to
Okay, yeah.
just at least for at least for 2 weeks. And if
Mm-hmm.
Stitch is a little out of commission, we'll look at him again in a fortnight. And
Yeah.
what we should see in those 2 weeks is a little bit, like, not more speed, but just not stopping, not getting distracted, not making excuses, just sort of
Mm-hmm.
motoring for, like, oh my God, 10 or 15 minutes. Like, just,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Oh, something I wanted. Oh, sorry, you go.
when he starts to do something without stopping, that's him telling you that's where he's the most comfortable. And that's where he's going to
Mm-hmm.
build the coordination the most,
Yeah.
is repeating that.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. What were you going to ask?
I was just going to ask you, someone suggested that I get him to, I haven't done it yet because I thought I want to discuss it with you because I'm not quite sure. They suggested that I hand lead him over cavalettis. They even said one cavaletti maybe like 30 centimeters high to get his proprioception working on his back legs. And I thought, oh, okay. Oh, don't know. Thought I'm going to ask Kirsten that one.
Here's my take on it, because I hear that a lot, especially from body workers and vets.
Yeah.
And what they're talking about is that it's like he's disconnected from his hind legs. So if you give him an obstacle that he bumps into, it brings his awareness to his hind legs, right?
Yeah.
That's what they mean by just changing proprioception. The
Mm-hmm.
challenge is, like, when we look at his hind legs, he doesn't really bend his hocks very much. Like
No.
that stiffness we see in the hind limbs,
Mm-hmm.
it's it's stiff because his back, his spine, and his pelvis are not yet doing what they should be doing. And
Mm-hmm.
it was his spine and pelvis getting unstable that made his legs stiff.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
So a moving body always has to have a source of stability as well as a source of mobility. And
Mm-hmm.
his mobility was in his spine and pelvis where it didn't belong. And so all of
Yeah.
his leg joints started stiffening up and his muscles stiffened up because the body requires stability, right?
Yep.
So it went from where it should be, it went from the center to the limbs. And when a
Mm-hmm.
horse looks like that, most vets and body workers say make him walk over ground poles, thinking that they're going to increase the mobility of the limbs.
Yeah.
But the
But it's
problem
not until
is
their back's stable that they're going to be able to do that anyway, is it?
when the back is stable, they will do that without ground poles. But
Yes. Yeah.
if you put those stiff legs over ground poles, you now have mobility in the legs and mobility in the back. So you have no
Mm-hmm.
more stability. And so what
Yeah.
happens
Yeah.
is it makes the muscles really tight. And if he could bend his legs, he would. Like I go, that's it,
Yes.
right? He would. And
Yeah.
when they don't
Yeah.
bend the legs, what happens when we send them even over one ground pole, and you can try it, you're not going to hurt him if you want to see what it looks like. But like
Mm-hmm.
with the bareback pad on and knowing what you've developed on the long reins, if
Mm-hmm.
you even ground drove him over a ground pole, what you would see happen is in order to bend the leg to get over the ground pole, you're going to see that bareback pad roll to one side. You're going to see
Yeah.
him,
Okay.
you're going to see him bend and throw out his rib cage and shoulder in order to get the leg over the ground pole.
Right. Okay. And in a horse that's got stability in their spine and they're using their legs correctly, they'd come up like that. Like
The,
so their barrel would stay straight and their legs would just go up.
so what a ground pole
Right. Okay.
is,
Good to know.
yeah, what it's supposed to do theoretically is increase the degree of flexion, right? They have to
Yeah.
pick up the leg, which
Yeah.
theoretically increases the flexion through the stifle, hock, and fetlock, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What nobody's talking about that is still happening all the same is if you have a horse that can't normally bend well through the stifle,
Hmm.
hock, or fetlock, then in order, it's like if you had a cast on your leg and you had to step over a ground pole, you would rearrange your whole
It's
body
wing
to
it. Yeah.
swing it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's that's basically what they're doing that's not visually obvious to humans,
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like if it's like he doesn't bend his
That's a
hocks.
good visual, actually. Like he's got a cast on his leg and he'll be swinging it out.
Yeah, or you could think of it like maybe he just has a cast on the hocks because they're not bending.
Yeah.
So, in order to get over a ground pole with hocks that don't bend, the stress is going to go to the fetlock, the stifle, the back, the hindquarter, maybe the rib cage. Like he's got to figure
Yeah.
out how to get that
Yeah.
leg over there with his hock restricted.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And do you think there's hope that once he's back, I mean, maybe it's a thing that we won't know until we get there, but once his back does hopefully strengthen and straighten out, that his hocks will start working? Or
Oh,
do you think they'd
yes.
have arthritis? Oh,
Even
okay.
even
There's
with
hope for us.
arthritis. Yeah, even with
Okay.
arthritis, you can restore the function of the hock. And
Okay.
so the other way to think of it when people talk about ground poles is when a horse tracks a circle, it also
Mhm.
requires a deeper flexion of the hind legs to balance on a turn or a circle. So
Yeah.
a turn or a circle is the equivalent to asking them to go over a ground pole. To me, it's no
Yeah.
different because especially the inside hind leg on a circle, in order to stay on a circle, the hock, the stifle, the fetlock have to exaggerate the flexion and the extension. But
Hmm.
it's to a slightly lesser degree than what we see going over a ground pole. but
Yep.
it's the same requirement, right? So can
Mhm.
this horse do a circle? No. And that's a lesser requirement than a ground pole,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good
right?
point.
So
Yeah.
if
I'm
he,
glad I didn't try it because I thought, no, I'm going to ask Kirsten
well,
that
and you
one.
certainly, like I always encourage people because you've really developed your eye for his movement and the feel of the long reins,
Hmm.
and you now know where you've made progress, where he's still sticky. And I
Hmm.
always encourage people to try it because
Hmm.
if you're reading your horse and you're watching the movement, if he lost forward, like he is on a circle, if he
Hmm.
became anxious or tense and became resistant, or if you
Yep.
watched for yourself the bareback pad suddenly doing this, right?
Yeah.
Then
Yep.
those three things would show you the dynamic effect of walking him over a ground pole or two. And when you see
Mm.
it for yourself, you don't
Yeah,
have,
it'll make sense.
it'll not only make sense, but now you know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I go, I've had vets and people with far better degrees than I have tell me to do things. And when you can see for yourself the effect it has on this particular horse, I go,
Yeah.
I might not disagree in theory, but if I watch
Yeah.
my horse go out of balance to do it, right,
Yeah.
then I
Yeah.
go, I don't care how famous you are or how well educated you are. I don't think it works.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like you say, it's maybe horses that are stable can do it and it, has benefits. But for horses that are not stable in their spine,
Right.
it's not going to be beneficial. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the
And
big that's the big difference, isn't it? Is the horse stable in its spine or not?
that's the
And
huge
what
difference. Yes.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so
And then
it's
getting the eye for that piece is what's missing, perhaps.
even understanding the connection between the spine and the legs. Like that's not even
Yeah.
really considered because
Yep.
when we look at balance, we're looking at the whole body system. When we're looking at therapy or medicine, we're looking at sort of body parts.
Parts. Yeah, yeah, yep,
And so a lot
yep.
of the advice with the ground poles is sort of a zero focus on the hind leg joints.
Hmm.
And what
Yeah.
I'm looking at with ground poles is I'm going, is it at the expense of the spine and the pelvis that we're doing ground poles? Or are the ground poles
Yeah, yeah,
enhancing the use of the spine and the pelvis? And that's even
yeah,
true
yeah.
for, I go circles to me are a little safer because you're not going to force an exaggeration of any joint flexion.
Hmm.
You know what I
Yep,
mean? It's and
yep.
so it's a little safer to say circle on the long reins, but that stiffness in his hind legs is the lack of mobility where it should be mobile, right?
Mm.
And so
Yep.
that stiffness in his hind legs tells you the spine and pelvis are still not fully stable.
Hmm.
They've made a lot of
Yep,
improvements, but without
yep.
that stability through the spine and pelvis, the legs will always be stiff,
Yeah, yep.
even if you did ground poles.
Yeah, yeah, makes
And
sense.
yeah. And so that's why you're not going to hurt him and he's certainly a horse that won't do what he's uncomfortable doing. So,
I could imagine that he won't walk over. Like if I raised it off the ground, I really don't think he'd walk over it. He'd just stop and look at it.
yeah.
So anyway, interesting to see.
Yeah, and then
Yeah, but I will try it just to have a look.
I had a big percheron I worked with one time who was sort of straight in the hocks like him and very stiff and unstable in the hind end. And
Hmm.
if there were jumps set up in the arena, like a little X or a low jump, that horse would drag you over the ground poles. She wanted to go
Really?
over the ground poles. Yeah. And I go,
Wow.
yeah. So I go, like, she sought them out. She would like pull you off the rail to get to walk over a little X rail. She wanted to go over that. And it's like I had to kind of respect that she knew better than me. She
Yeah,
likes it.
yeah, if they
It
like
must,
it.
yeah. So I go, okay, this horse wants to do ground pulls. And I didn't make a big deal out of it. I just let her go over the little jumps that were set up when she wanted
Hmm.
to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm sure there's some benefit to it, but we have to look at it for ourselves. Does that make sense?
Mm.
We have to see
Yeah,
the
yeah,
connection between, like, everybody sort of just says ground pulls like it's going to work. And I
yeah,
go,
yeah,
it's not quite that simple because it depends on that particular horse and how they
exactly.
organize. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Whether it,
maybe for horses like with straight spines and maybe ground poles does then develop up their muscles appropriately.
yeah, or
But
maybe like for this Percheron, maybe it was the way she changed the proprioception through her joints. Like maybe she just went,
yeah,
I feel my legs when I do this. And that was why she wanted to do
yeah,
it. And
yeah.
that's what they were saying
Oh,
to you.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Another suggestion was another suggestion was that to put bell boots on his hind feet
Yeah, I've
so
heard that
that
one
he
too.
becomes a bit more aware of comes a bit more aware of his feet. I mean, I do have those, not, well, I've got bell boots, but I've got those other boots as well, or plus the polo wraps that I purchased. And I suppose that also kind of made him aware of his feet. So do you think that's beneficial to put them on
I try
for
it.
that reason? Or
So what we're
yeah.
we're talking about two different things that I want to clarify
Mm,
is do you
yeah.
understand the difference between a proprioceptive aid and a dynamic aid that involves resistance?
Is the proprioception one just so their awareness is going to that body part so they can kind of suss out where
Exactly.
they are in space?
Nailed it.
Whereas the other one, is it more supportive of their body? Like their, I
Yeah.
don't know,
So,
was it
so
strapping up their ligaments?
um, when I say we work dynamically with the horses, like what you're doing with the long reins is, say, when the inside rein gets slack, you're pulling the outside rein. And what that's
Yeah.
effectively doing dynamically through the resistance of the outside rein is you're dynamically helping him balance his weight between the left side of his body and the right side of his body, which is
Mm,
influencing the use of his spine, right?
yeah.
So that's
Yep.
something, it's not an opinion, it's not whether or not they figure it out. It's this resistance will cause you to rebalance your weight. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
The same
Yep.
as if
Yep.
I pulled on you or pushed on you. And that to me is how we change the habit of coordination, which is how he chooses to move, which is going to affect the entire body, every joint, tendon, ligament, muscle, bone, everything, right? Because
Yep. Yep.
that's how we guide coordination dynamically.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anything that is proprioceptive, I go, it might work, it might not, because it's just bringing an internal awareness to an area of the body, but it doesn't
Yes.
work. It doesn't work dynamically. We're sort of hoping by bringing awareness there
Yeah.
that it causes a change.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. So I go,
Yep.
anything that is sort of a proprioceptive tool is never going to hurt because you're not using any resistance. You're not guiding at
No.
all.
No.
You're just bringing
Mm-hmm.
awareness to that part of the body. And it can be, they can sometimes be kind of miraculous. Like sometimes that's the thing that tips the scale. Like sometimes it really helps.
Mm-hmm.
But I think
Yep. Yep.
people confuse, they think that proprioceptive tools will change coordination. And I go,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I go, if
No.
they do, it's only going to be a tiny bit. It's not going to be the kind of change of coordination that we're doing in training. Do you know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
okay. Yeah. Yeah. And if I was to put his back boots on again, the ones I bought, and if he starts kicking his leg, because he did that a few times, is that good or bad? I'm thinking, is it hurting him, or is it good that he's, as you say, knocking the rust off? Like what's
Yep.
I don't know, what's your thoughts?
So that's if you put bell boots on the hind feet, that's proprioceptive.
Hmm.
If you put
Hmm.
the sports medicine boots or the polo wraps on that have the fetlock resistance, that makes it
Yeah.
dynamic.
Okay.
That's the
So
difference.
maybe I should go back to that, shall I,
You
and
could
try
try
that?
it because the reason horses either hike their legs way up or kick out a little bit or fuss a little bit when you first start giving a resistant wrap is because there's
Hmm.
resistance. When you give resistance, then something has to adapt and change.
Yeah,
That's why
yeah.
it works
Okay.
dynamically. And so
Yeah.
when you put the bell boots on, it doesn't offer any resistance at all. It's entirely proprioceptive. So it'll bring his awareness to his hind legs,
Yeah.
right? And what a
And you said it
ground,
was the,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, you keep going.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. It was the sports medicines boots, and it goes under the fetlock. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the only way to increase dynamically any extra flexion in the hock or the stifle for sure is to restrict the
Hmm.
movement of the fetlock. And
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
that's the physical resistance that changes the coordination or the use of the upper hind leg joints.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
that's why they fuss about it at first, is because suddenly they can't move the joint they're used to moving the most, and they have to start moving the joint they're not used to moving the most.
Yeah. And is half-hour session okay for
Hmm.
them? Like that wouldn't be too much, would it, with those on?
Nope.
Can I put them on and leave them in the paddock, like for them to walk around in, or is that not suitable either?
What I do, because you guys get hot weather like we get, and what
Mm.
happens is, especially with polo wraps or if the boots are like neoprene or something that will trap the heat, it
Hmm.
actually, whoops, let me hope I can get that back. There we go. It can add heat to the leg. And
Okay.
when you add temperature heat to the suspensories, what I do in the summer, in the winter, you're fine because the legs are cold. But when it's
Yeah,
already
yeah.
blistering hot outside, I
Yeah.
wrap the legs for work, and then I tend to leave the wraps on in the paddock either until I feed dinner or for a few hours, because
Yeah.
when they're working with wraps on, you're heating up and stretching those tendons and ligaments. And if you just take
Hmm.
them off when you're done, they can be a little on the loose side, and then you're risking maybe a strain or an injury. So,
Yeah, okay.
so if I have the, say, polo wraps on for a half hour of work, but like you said, it's 40 degrees outside, I,
Mm.
I would leave the wraps on until the sweat dries and he cools down before I would take them off.
Okay. And what about on a cool day or a cool night, leaving them on for just for him in the paddock? Would that be
So,
beneficial as he's walking around with support on his fetlock?
yes, it would definitely be beneficial. Horses that are
Yeah.
diagnosed with degenerative suspensory ligament disorder, that's one of the things we can do. Um,
Okay.
and so the rule the vets give is 12 hours on, 12 hours off to be safe.
Ah.
If you leave them
Yep.
on 24/7, you can get what's called a bowed tendon. So if you
Oh,
never,
okay.
yeah, if you never take the wraps off and you just leave them on all the time, it can actually
Hmm.
create a bow and it looks like a little like bow and arrow bow. And it's kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's not good either. And so
Right. No.
to give this maximum support without bowing a tendon, they say 12
Hmm.
hours on, 12 hours off. And that's why
Yep.
I figure if I put them on the days he works and I leave them on for another 8 hours, it's not going to hurt him.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I might do that. I did buy some of those polo wraps. I'm just not very skilled at it. I don't know if I'd leave them on in the paddock. I would imagine they'd come off from my wrapping ability.
They
But I
might.
might purchase, yeah, I might purchase some of those sports medicine boots with a fetlock support and then put them on when I'm working him, leave them on overnight and then take them off in the morning.
Yeah.
Maybe see how it
Yeah.
goes with that.
And especially if you're going to use the neoprene boots in the heat, it's better to have them on at night rather than during the day.
Yeah, yeah, during
Hmm.
the day it'd be too hot. Yeah,
Hmm. And in the
yeah.
winter, it won't matter much, but when we get into our hot season, it really can heat up the lower legs. And so I
Hmm.
like to let the
Yeah.
horse fully cool off for hours with the leg wraps on before I take them off.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking for his um just how stiff his back end is. I'm just wondering if that might help.
I
I
found
don't
a
know.
noticeable difference in the stability through the pelvis and the low back with horses like him when I
Hmm.
wrapped the legs and when I didn't wrap the legs. I could feel the
Yeah,
difference
okay.
in the
Yep,
stability. And
yep.
even though you're not riding him, I think you would notice the difference in his desire to move forward. I think
Yeah.
I think with the wraps during work, he might be slightly less prone to stopping, and it might be
Mm.
a bit of support that could make a difference with his willingness to go on a circle.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, because this is
Okay, that's
really
what I'll
pretty
do.
good. And he may, if he does object and hike up his legs and kick out a bit, I find after 2 or 3 times I wrap the legs, that just goes away completely. It
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just, but you're not
They're probably
hurting
just
him.
not used to the feeling, are they,
Yeah.
initially?
And it
Yep.
does have, like I said, it has some dynamic resistance, so they're feeling that. And
Mm.
they don't quite
Yep.
know what to do with that feeling at first, so it kind of just goes here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. What I could do is I could put them on one evening when I'm not working and he just has his dinner, put them on. So then he gets used to them in the paddock without me there. And
Oh,
then
there you
I can
go.
just,
Yep,
he can work through that.
yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because they just protect. Like what they do,
Yeah.
they sort of restrict the movement of the fetlock and they sort of create that tightness around the leg for the suspensory. So those are
Yeah.
the
Yep.
two sort of dynamic support systems are resisting movement in the fetlock and resisting any in and out movement of the suspensory.
Hmm. Yep.
So I would try that. Maybe put him on at night, let him work it out in the paddock overnight. And
Mm.
if he starts, like if you're close by, as long as he's not running and freaking out, you're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I find the more I learned, like when I started putting polo wraps on, it's one of those learning curves that's awkward and feels terrible. And then when you get the
Mm.
hang of it, I now prefer putting on polos over sports medicine boots because I struggle more getting the boots on than I do the polos.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I should just practice, shouldn't I?
Well, either way, like start with what's easy, let him get used to it. But I think kind
Hmm.
of playing with it, even on a day he's not working, if you put him on overnight, then see how he does.
Mm.
And
Yep.
if you
Yep.
notice a big
Sounds good.
difference, there would be no problem if you're leaving them on for 12 hours. That's the safe amount of time for
Yes.
leaving those boots or wraps on.
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, that sounds like a plan. I could do that.
Okay. Anything else we need to cover? I don't want to keep you
No,
from
that's
work.
about
I
it.
know we're getting close.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, no, I think we've covered everything.
Good. Let me stop the share. Hang on, let me pause this. But that, like, it's kind of exciting because what I see with Pablo is just getting him to be comfortable enough that he wanted to move again. We've had to sort of
Mm.
throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks, right? And
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
kind of had equal value. It was like, other than
Yes.
going to the long range, he really made a big difference. And so we've stuck with that.
Yeah.
But everything else
Yeah.
has been pretty good, not great, pretty good, not great. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and I saw in this video a distinct preference for
Hmm.
you behind him going on the rail. That
Oh,
was,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's his go-to.
yeah. So once,
Yeah.
because it's been so hard to gain any desire to move forward, I would sort of
Hmm.
like relish that before you challenge it too much.
Yeah, okay.
I would
Yeah.
build on that and keep getting that desire to come up and more comfort to come through before you
Yes.
over challenge at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Look at your cat sitting there,
I
listening
know.
to every word.
I know. She hangs out. And it's
Yeah.
so funny. Sometimes she's in the doorway and you can't see her, and then you just see the silhouette.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. She loves Zoom
Cute.
meetings. What can I say?
Yeah. Yeah, very good. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I'll see you in a fortnight's time.
Okay. Sounds
Yeah.
good. I'm really curious. And if we look at Stitch, that's great, but I might want to see Pablo about that time too to see if we're kind of on
Yeah.
track with him.
So the vet said Stitch will probably be out of work for a month. So,
That's what I
God,
figured.
anyway.
Yeah, it
Yeah, yeah. So we'll do Stitch, sorry, Pablo again next time, and then we'll see. Yeah,
how
cool,
Stitch is doing.
awesome. All right. Well,
Okay,
thank you.
sounds good.
Okay. Have a good night.
All
Bye.
right, you too.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.